The year was 2347, and humanity had been part of the Galactic Council for only 30 years. Earth was still considered primitive by most alien civilizations. The Council had placed strict rules on what humans could do. They were not allowed to build powerful weapons. Their fleet was small and weak. Most alien species looked down on humans and treated them like children who needed guidance. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the colony ship, Horizon, and watched the stars pass by. He was a tall man with tired eyes and gray hair at his temples. Behind him in the crew quarters were 15,000 civilians. Men, women, and children who were traveling to start a new life on New Terra. It was a frontier world far from Earth. The journey would take more weeks. Jake thought about his wife Lisa and their 2 children who were sleeping in their cabin. They were excited about the new world. Jake smiled at the thought. The Horizon had no weapons. Council law forbade colony ships from carrying military equipment. Jake had argued against this rule many times, but Earth's government had no choice. If they broke Council rules, they would face sanctions. Other species would refuse to trade with humanity. Earth needed the resources and technology that came from being part of the galactic community, so the Horizon flew through space completely defenseless. The ship's sensors officer called out. Her name was Linda Grant, and she looked worried. She reported multiple contacts dropping out of faster-than-light travel ahead of them. Jake moved to her station and looked at the display. 8 warships had appeared in their path. The designs were familiar. Krell vessels. Jake felt his stomach tighten. The Krell were known throughout the galaxy as aggressive and violent. They respected only strength and saw weaker species as prey. Jake ordered the crew to send a message to the Krell ships. He introduced himself and explained that the Horizon was a civilian vessel on a peaceful mission. He requested permission to pass through the sector. The response came quickly. A massive Krell warrior appeared on the main screen. His face was covered in thick scales, and his eyes were yellow with vertical pupils. He wore armor decorated with bones and trophies from previous kills. The Krell identified himself as Warlord Thrak. He laughed when Jake finished speaking. His voice was deep and filled with contempt. He said that humans were weak parasites who did not deserve to travel through space. He said the Horizon would be destroyed as a lesson to other inferior species. Jake tried to reason with him. He explained that attacking a civilian ship would bring Council punishment. Thrak laughed again. He said the Council was weak and would do nothing. He was right. Jake immediately sent distress signals to every Council frequency. He broadcast their location and situation. He begged for help. The nearest Council peacekeeping fleet responded. They said they were 3 days away. 3 days. Jake knew they would all be dead long before help arrived. He ordered his crew to prepare for emergency procedures. They had to protect the civilians. They had to buy time somehow. The Krell warships opened fire. The first shots were precise and calculated. They did not try to destroy the Horizon quickly. Instead, they targeted the engines. Explosions rocked the ship, and Jake was thrown against his command chair. Alarms screamed throughout the vessel. The chief engineer reported that the main engines were destroyed. They were dead in space. The Krell circled the Horizon like predators playing with wounded prey. Jake kept broadcasting distress calls. He pleaded with any ship in range to help them. No one came. The Krell continued their attack. They fired on the life support systems next. Jake watched in horror as sections of the ship lost power. He heard screaming through the internal communications. People were dying. His crew worked frantically to reroute power and seal. Damaged sections, but there were too many breaches. Hours passed like an eternity. The Krell took their time. They seemed to enjoy the suffering they caused. Jake tried everything he could think of. He offered to surrender. He offered the ship's supplies. He offered himself as a hostage. Thrak rejected every plea. He said humans needed to learn their place in the galaxy. He said this was a valuable lesson. Jake felt rage building inside him, but there was nothing he could do. The Horizon had no weapons. They had no defenses. They were helpless. The escape pods were the next target. Jake had hoped to evacuate the civilians, but the Krell destroyed each pod launch bay methodically. One by one, the escape routes were eliminated. People trapped on the dying ship began to panic. Jake tried to keep them calm, but his voice sounded hollow even to himself. He knew they were all going to die. 6 hours after the attack began, Jake received a message from his wife. She was in their cabin with their children. The life support in that section was failing. She told him she loved him. She told him to be strong. She said their children were scared. Jake wanted to go to them, but he could not leave the bridge. He told her he loved her. He told her to hold the children close. The communication cut off. That section of the ship had lost all power. By the time the Krell finished their attack, 12,000 people were dead. Only 3,000 survived, and they were trapped in sealed sections with limited oxygen. The ship was a floating tomb. Thrak appeared on the screen one last time. He said he was satisfied with the lesson. He said other species would hear about this and know not to challenge the Krell. Then his fleet jumped, way into faster-than-light travel. They left the horizon broken and dying in empty space. Jake sat in his command chair and stared at nothing. His wife was gone. His children were gone. Thousands of innocent people were dead. The distress signals continued broadcasting automatically. Help would arrive eventually, but it would be too late for most of them. Jake felt something change inside him. The grief was there and the pain was overwhelming, but beneath it all was something else. Something cold and hard. He made a promise to himself in that moment. If he survived this, he would make sure humanity never felt this helpless again. A Council medical frigate arrived 2 days later. They rescued the 3,000 survivors, including Jake. He barely remembered the rescue. Everything felt distant and unreal. The medical staff tried to help him, but there was nothing they could do for what he had lost. They took the survivors back to Council space. The horizon was left behind as evidence, a monument to humanity's weakness and the galaxy's indifference. The survivors of the horizon were brought to the Council headquarters on Zenther Prime. Ambassador Patricia Wells stood before the assembled delegates from hundreds of worlds. She was a woman in her 50s with sharp features and eyes that had seen too much. She presented the evidence of the massacre. She showed recordings of the attack. She displayed the names and faces of the 12,000 dead. She demanded justice. The council chamber was massive, with seats arranged in circular tiers. Alien beings of every shape and size filled the space. Some looked like insects. Others were made of crystalline structures. Some breathed methane, while others existed as energy fields. They all listened to Patricia's presentation with varying degrees of interest. Most seemed bored. High Arbiter Lysara presided over the session. She was Zentheri, a species that had dominated galactic politics for thousands of years. Her skin was pale blue, and her eyes were large and black. She spoke with a voice that carried artificial authority. She said the Council was deeply sorry for humanity's loss. She said the Krell Empire would receive a formal reprimand. She said that prosecuting individual warbands was difficult because they operated outside official government control. Patricia felt her hands clench into fists. She kept her voice steady and asked what else the Council would do. Would they send peacekeepers to hunt down Thrak? Would they impose sanctions on the Krell Empire until they handed over the warlord? Would they provide military protection for human colonies? Lysara looked at her with something like pity. She explained that such attacks were unfortunately common for developing species. She said humanity needed to learn patience. She said diplomacy took time. The message was clear to everyone in the chamber. Human lives did not matter. Earth was too young and too weak to demand real action from the Council. The older species saw the massacre as a minor incident. 12,000 dead humans meant nothing compared to the trillions of beings across the galaxy. Patricia stood there feeling rage build inside her chest. She thanked the Council for their time and left the chamber. She returned to Earth with the Council's decision. The news spread across every human world within hours. People gathered in streets and watched the broadcasts. They saw Patricia's report. They saw the images of the horizon wreckage. They heard that the Council would do nothing. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Protests erupted in every major city. People demanded action. They demanded protection. They demanded revenge. Captain Jake Morrison was recovering in a military hospital when he heard the news. He had barely spoken since the rescue. The doctor said he was in shock, but when he learned that the council would not punish the Krell, something changed in his eyes. He got out of his hospital bed and requested to speak with Earth's government. Within a week, he was standing before the United Earth Assembly. The assembly chamber was packed with representatives from every nation and colony. President Daniel Carter sat at the head of the room. He was a former military officer himself, and he understood what more Rison had endured. Jake stood at the podium and looked at the assembled leaders, spoke quietly, but every word carried weight. He said the galaxy had shown its true face, said the council would never protect humanity. He said if Earth wanted to survive, it would need to protect itself. The assembly voted that same day. Earth would withdraw from all weapons development treaties with the council. They would begin building a real military fleet. They would no longer accept restrictions that left them defenseless. President Carter addressed the world that evening. He announced the Earth Defense Initiative. He said humanity would never be victims again. The speech was broadcast across all human colonies and settlements. People cheered and cried at the same time. Admiral Karen Hughes was appointed Supreme Commander of the new military program. She was a veteran who had fought pirates in the frontier systems for years. She knew how brutal space combat could be. She understood that the galaxy respected only strength. The president gave her unlimited authority and resources. Her mission was simple: build a fleet that could defend humanity against any threat. Karen immediately began organizing the effort. She established secret shipyards and asteroid belts far from council observation. She recruited the best engineers and scientists from across human space. She brought in Dr. Henry Cross, who had been working on theoretical weapons for decades. His research had always been blocked by council treaties. Now he had permission to build anything that could protect Earth. The work began in secret. Humanity had learned from the council species over 30 years. They had studied alien technology and manufacturing techniques. But humans also had something the older species had lost: desperation, necessity, the ability to innovate under pressure. Earth's factories ran day and night. Resources were redirected from civilian projects to military production. Every human colony contributed materials and labor. Dr. Cross and his team developed weapons that made even the military officers nervous. Nuclear-pumped gamma-ray lasers that could slice through ship armor like paper. Railguns that fired projectiles at fractions of light speed. Swarm missiles guided by artificial intelligence that could overwhelm any defense system. Antimatter warheads that released the power of stars. These weapons had been banned by the Council for thousands of years. Earth built them anyway. Admiral Hughes focused on ship design. Council vessels were large and slow, relied on heavy armor and shields. Human ships would be different, fast and maneuverable, designed to hit hard and avoid damage rather than absorb it. The first dreadnought rolled out of the shipyard 6 months after the Horizon Massacre. It was named Vengeance, and it carried enough firepower to destroy a small fleet. While Earth built its military, the Krell continued their attacks. Warlord Thrak had become famous among his people for destroying the Horizon. He launched raids on 3 more human outposts over the following months. Each attack killed hundreds more civilians. The Krell recorded their victories and broadcast them across underground networks. They mocked humanity's weakness. They laughed at human suffering. The Galactic Council continued to issue statements of concern. They sent diplomatic messages to the Krell Empire requesting restraint. The Krell ignored them. The larger council powers like the Zintheri and Vorthans seemed content to let the situation continue. They saw the Krell as useful. The aggressive species kept younger civilizations afraid and dependent on council protection. It maintained the existing power structure. On Earth, the attacks only strengthened public resolve. Military recruitment reached levels not seen since the early colony wars. Millions of volunteers enlisted. They trained in new weapons and tactics. They prepared for war. Jake Morrison joined the new fleet as a tactical advisor. His knowledge of the Krell attack patterns was valuable. More importantly, his presence inspired the troops. He was a symbol of what they were fighting for. 6 months after the Horizon Massacre, Admiral Hughes received intelligence from human operatives in neutral space. The Krell warband responsible for the attacks was gathering in the Kareth system. Warlord Thrak was hosting a celebration of his victories. Over 40 Krell warships would be present. It was the largest concentration of Krell military power outside their home systems. Karen brought the information to President Carter. She presented a plan: single overwhelming strike against the entire warband. Total annihilation. No warnings, no mercy, no survivors. Carter listened to the proposal and looked at the casualty reports from the Krell attacks. He thought about the 12,000 dead from the horizon. He thought about the hundreds more killed in subsequent raids. He approved the mission. Admiral Hughes named the Operation Reckoning. She assembled a task force of 68 warships. Every vessel was equipped with the new weapons. Every crew was trained and ready. Jake Morrison would join the fleet aboard the Vengeance. He would watch as humanity delivered its answer to the galaxy. The fleet prepared to jump to the Kareth system. Earth had been patient. Earth had sought justice through proper channels. Earth had begged for protection. Now Earth would show the galaxy what humans were capable of when pushed beyond endurance. The time for words had passed. The time for action had come. Humanity was ready to remind the universe of an old Earth saying, "Never mistake kindness for weakness." The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Kareth system. 68 warships appeared in perfect formation. Admiral Karen Hughes stood on the bridge of the Vengeance and watched the tactical display. The Krell vessels were scattered across the system exactly as the intelligence reports had predicted. Many had their shields powered down. Their weapons were offline. They were celebrating and completely unprepared for battle. Jake Morrison stood beside Karen at the tactical station. His face showed no emotion, but his hands gripped the edge of the console tightly. Somewhere in that enemy fleet was the ship that had killed his family. Warlord Thrak's command vessel, the Bloodfang, sat at the center of the Krell formation. It was a massive battlecruiser covered in armor plates and weapon batteries. Right now, it was vulnerable. Karen opened a communication channel to the entire Krell fleet. Her voice was cold and empty of feeling. She said only 4 sentences. For the horizon, for the 12,000, for every human killed by Krell hands, no mercy. Then she closed the channel and gave the order to fire. The human fleet opened up with everything they had. Railguns fired first. Magnetically accelerated slugs screamed through space at incredible speeds. The projectiles were small, but they traveled at a significant fraction of light speed. When they hit Krell shields, the shields collapsed instantly. When they hit armor, the slugs punched straight through. The first volley destroyed 6 Krell destroyers before the enemy even realized they were under attack. Alarms began screaming on Krell vessels across the system. Crews scrambled to battle stations. Captains shouted orders in confusion and panic. Some ships managed to raise shields. Others started charging weapons. But they were too slow and too disorganized. The human attack was precise and overwhelming. Swarm missiles launched from human cruisers. Thousands of small warheads spread out in coordinated patterns. Each missile had its own guidance system, powered by artificial intelligence. They communicated with each other and adjusted their approach in real time. The Krell Point defense systems tried to shoot them down, but there were too many targets coming from too many angles. The missiles found gaps in the defensive fire and slammed into engine sections and reactor cores. Explosions bloomed across the Krell fleet like deadly flowers. The gamma-ray lasers fired next. These weapons were invisible to the naked eye. No warning flash, no visible beam. Just sudden, devastating destruction. A Krell carrier tried to launch fighters, but a laser sliced through its hangar bay. The entire section exploded from the inside. Another beam cut through a battlecruiser's command tower. The ship went dead in space as its bridge crew died instantly. The Krell finally began fighting back. A group of 6 warships formed a defensive formation and returned fire. Plasma bolts and missile salvos streaked toward the human fleet. But human ships were smaller and faster. They dodged and weaved through the incoming fire. Their electronic warfare systems confused Krell targeting computers. Most of the enemy shots missed completely. One Krell missile did find its target. A human frigate took a direct hit and broke apart. The crew had no time to evacuate. Karen watched the frigate die and her expression did not change. She ordered the fleet to focus fire on the 6 Krell ships that had scored the kill. Within seconds, those 6 vessels were overwhelmed by railgun fire and exploded. Warlord Thrak finally got the Bloodfang operational. His massive battlecruiser's shields came online at full power. His weapon batteries began charging. He opened a communication channel and roared challenges at the human fleet. He called them cowards. He said they would die like the Horizon crew had died. His voice was filled with rage and confidence. Jake Morrison looked at Karen. She nodded once. Jake took control of a weapons console and personally targeted the Bloodfang. He fired a full spread of swarm missiles. Hundreds of warheads converged on Thrak's ship. Krell battlecruiser's defenses were impressive. Point defense guns destroyed many missiles. Dozens got through and hammered the shields. The impacts made the entire ship shudder. Then the Vengeance fired its main railgun. The projectile was larger than those fired by smaller ships. It crossed the distance in a heartbeat and struck the Bloodfang's forward shields. The shields held but flickered and weakened. Karen ordered a second shot. This time, the projectile punched through the weakened shields and tore into the armor. The Bloodfang's hull breached an atmosphere vented into space. Thrak tried to maneuver his damaged ship away from the battle. Karen was not going to let that happen. She ordered 3 human destroyers to pursue. They stayed on the Bloodfang and pounded it with continuous fire. The Krell battlecruiser's armor was thick, but it could not withstand the concentrated assault. Systems began failing across the ship. Power fluctuated. Weapons went offline. The Bloodfang launched escape pods. Dozens of small capsules ejected from the dying battlecruiser. Jake watched them scatter and felt nothing. He remembered his wife's last message. He remembered his children scared and dying. Gave the order that Admiral Hughes had authorized before the battle. No survivors. Human point defense turrets tracked the escape pods. Precise laser fire destroyed each one. Some Krell tried to use their personal armor thrusters to evade, but there was nowhere to hide in open space. The vacuum claimed them all. Warlord Thrak's pod was among them. Jake personally confirmed the kill. The monster who had murdered 12,000 humans was dead. The battle continued across the system. Krell ships tried to regroup, but human tactics kept them separated and confused. 3 Krell carriers attempted to form a defensive line. They had the most fighters and the heaviest armor. Admiral Hughes decided to use the weapons that terrified even her own crew. She gave the order to deploy antimatter torpedoes. 3 human missile cruisers launched the special warheads. The torpedoes accelerated to near light speed. Their warheads contained microscopic amounts of antimatter held in magnetic containment fields. When the torpedoes struck their targets, the containment fields collapsed. Matter met antimatter, and the result was complete conversion to energy. The first carrier simply vanished. A sphere of pure white light expanded from the impact point and consumed the entire ship. The shock waves spread out for hundreds of kilometers and destroyed everything it touched. 2 nearby Krell destroyers were caught in the blast and disintegrated. The second and third carriers suffered the same fate. Miniature suns bloomed in space where the ships had been. The remaining Krell vessels saw the antimatter detonations and broke. Their commanders abandoned any thought of victory or even organized retreat. They simply ran. Human ships pursued them systematically. Railguns and missiles chased down fleeing Krell vessels. Some tried to jump too faster than light speed, but human fire disabled their engines before they could escape. One by one, the Krell warships died. 41 minutes after the battle began, the Kareth system fell silent. Not a single Krell vessel remained intact. Burning wreckage drifted through space. 2 of the system's moons had been sterilized by the antimatter shockwaves. The human fleet had suffered minimal damage. 2 frigates lost and 1 cruiser with moderate hull damage. Every other ship was operational. Admiral Hughes ordered the fleet to remain in system for 1 hour. Sensors scanned every piece of debris. They searched for survivors or anyone trying to hide. They found nothing. The Krell warband had been completely annihilated. Every ship destroyed, every crew dead. It was total and absolute victory. Karen opened a final communication channel. one broadcast on every frequency used by galactic civilizations. Her message would reach across the entire galaxy. She spoke clearly, and her words would be remembered for generations. Let it be known to all species. Humanity will not be victims. Humanity will not beg for justice. Attack us, and we will end you. This is our declaration. This is our promise. The human fleet jumped out of the Kareth system. They left behind the wreckage as a message. The Battle of Kareth lasted less than an hour, but it changed everything. The galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. Earth had shown its true strength. The Council had refused to act. The Krell had thought humans were weak. Both had been proven catastrophically wrong. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge as the fleet traveled back to human space. He felt empty but also satisfied. His family's deaths had been avenged. The monster who killed them was dead. But more than that, humanity had made a statement. Never again would they be helpless. Never again would they rely on others for protection. The price had been paid in blood, but the message was clear. Humanity had arrived as a true power in the galaxy. News of the Kareth massacre spread across the galaxy within hours. Every species with communication technology received the broadcasts. Admiral Hughes had made sure of that. The battle recordings showed everything. Human weapons tearing through Krell warships, antimatter detonations, the systematic destruction of every escape pod. 41 Krell vessels annihilated in less than an hour. The galaxy watched and understood that something fundamental had changed. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session on Zenthor Prime, the massive chamber filled with delegates faster than anyone could remember. Species that rarely attended council meetings sent representatives. Everyone wanted to see how the council would respond to humanity's actions. The chamber buzzed with conversations in hundreds of languages. Fear and uncertainty filled the air. Ambassador Patricia Wells walked into the chamber with her head held high. She carried a data module containing complete records of the battle. Her assistant set up holographic displays. When High Arbiter Lysera called the session to order, Patricia stepped forward. Duh! She did not wait for permission to speak. She simply began her presentation. The hallist showed the battle from multiple angles. Krell ships exploding, railgun projectiles moving too fast to see, swarm missiles overwhelming defenses. The gamma-ray lasers cutting through armor, then the antimatter weapons. The alien delegates watched in stunned silence as 3 Krell carriers vanished in blinding flashes of light. Some delegates looked away. Others leaned forward to study the footage more closely. Patricia let the recordings speak for themselves. When they finished, she provided technical data. Weapon specifications, ship capabilities, casualty reports. She showed that humanity had developed military technology equal or superior to civilizations thousands of years older. She showed that Earth's industrial capacity could produce warships at rates that should have been impossible. She showed that humans were willing to use weapons of mass destruction without hesitation. High Arbiter Lysara's pale blue face had gone even paler. Her large black eyes were wide with shock. She demanded an explanation. Her voice shook slightly as she accused humanity of war crimes. She said Earth had violated every weapons treaty. She said the use of antimatter weapons was barbaric. She said the destruction of escape pods was murder. Patricia looked at Lysara with cold eyes. She reminded the Council that Earth had formally withdrawn from all weapons treaties 6 months earlier. She pointed out that the Krell warband had been operating in neutral space outside Council jurisdiction. She stated that humanity had simply exercised its right to self-defense. Her voice was calm, but her words cut like knives. She asked Lysara where the Council peacekeepers had been when the Horizon was destroyed. She asked why Warlord Thrak had faced no consequences for killing 12,000 civilians. She asked why humanity should follow rules that offered them no protection. The Council chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates shouted at each other in dozens of languages. The smaller and younger species cheered Patricia's words. Many of them had suffered similar attacks over the years. They had begged the Council for help just like humanity had. They had been ignored just like humanity had. Now they watched as one species finally fought back and won. It gave them hope. The mid-tier civilizations expressed concern and worry. They understood the military implications of what humanity had done. If Earth could develop such powerful weapons in 6 months, what would they have in 6 years? Would stop other species from following humanity's example. The careful balance of power that had existed for millennia was suddenly unstable. The major powers were both furious and afraid. The Zentheri military command released their analysis of the battle. Their experts had studied every second of the recordings. Their conclusions shocked even their own government. Human weapons technology had advanced beyond Zentheri capabilities in several key areas. Human ship design emphasized speed and maneuverability over raw power, but the combination was devastatingly effective. Most concerning was humanity's willingness to use forbidden weapons without moral restraint. The Vorthan ambassador stood to speak. Counselor Zreth was nearly 3 meters tall and resembled a massive insect. His voice clicked and buzzed through translation devices. He proposed immediate military action against Earth. He argued that humanity had proven itself a threat to galactic stability, said Earth must be disarmed before they became too powerful to stop. Several delegates voiced agreement. Patricia listened to the proposal calmly. When Zareth finished, she rose to respond. Her words were simple and direct. She told the council that any military action against Earth would be met with total war. She reminded them that humanity now possessed weapons the galaxy had not seen used in thousands of years. She asked if the council was prepared to face antimatter warheads and gamma-ray lasers. She asked how many council species were willing to sacrifice their fleets and their worlds to punish humanity for defending itself. The chamber fell silent. The threat was clear and credible. Earth had demonstrated both the capability and willingness to fight without limits. A war with humanity would be catastrophic for everyone involved. Even if the council won, the cost would be enormous. Many delegates began reconsidering their positions. High Arbiter Lasara called for a vote on military sanctions against Earth. The vote required a 2/3 majority to pass. The chamber's voting system displayed the results in real time. The motion failed. Too many species abstained or voted against it. Some did so because they sympathized with humanity. Others feared the consequences of war. A few saw opportunity in the changing power structure. Patricia delivered one final statement before leaving the chamber. She said Earth had sought the council's protection and found only indifference. She said humanity had begged for justice and received only empty words. She said Earth would defend its people and its interests by any means necessary. She said the days of humanity accepting victim status were over. If the council came for Earth, they would learn the same lesson the Krell had learned. She walked out while delegates shouted questions and protests. Across the galaxy, reactions varied wildly. The Krell Empire received the news of the Kareth battle with shock and rage. The loss of 40 warships and an entire warband was devastating. Warlord Thrak had been a powerful figure within Krell society. His death and the manner of his defeat humiliated the entire species. But the Krell government issued no official response. Internal reports showed chaos as various factions debated whether to seek revenge or avoid further conflict with humanity. Younger species throughout the galaxy watched Earth's example closely. Within weeks, several civilizations announced they were withdrawing from Council weapons treaties. They began investing heavily in military development. The Galactic Council tried to stop this trend, but had no effective way to enforce compliance. The authority that the Council had held for thousands of years was crumbling. On Earth, the reaction was jubilation. News of the victory at Kareth spread through every human settlement. People celebrated in the streets. Admiral Hughes and Jake Morrison became instant heroes. Their images appeared on every news broadcast. Songs were written about the battle. Children played games reenacting the destruction of the Krell fleet. President Carter's approval ratings reached historic highs, but Admiral Hughes knew the celebration would be short-lived. She studied the intelligence reports from across the galaxy. The Zentherian Vorthans were already planning responses to humanity's rise. Other species were watching to see if Earth could maintain its military advantage. Humanity had won a single battle and made a powerful statement. Now they had to prove they could back up that statement long term. Karen met with President Carter in a secure facility deep underground. She presented her analysis and recommendations. Earth needed to continue expanding its fleet. They needed to establish defensive positions along all borders. They needed allies among the other species. Most importantly, they needed to show strength without appearing aggressive. The galaxy was afraid of humanity now. That fear could be useful, but it could also make Earth a target. Jake Morrison was promoted to Commodore and given command of a patrol group. His mission was to protect human frontier colonies and hunt down any remaining Krell warbands. He accepted the assignment without emotion. The revenge he had sought was achieved, but it had not brought his family back. Instead, he channeled his grief into protecting other families from suffering the same fate. The galaxy had entered a new era. The old powers were shaken. The younger species were emboldened. Humanity stood at the center of this change. Earth's brutal retaliation at Kareth had shocked the Council into silence, but that silence would not last forever. The question now was what would come next. 3 months had passed since the Battle of Kareth, and the galaxy was still adjusting to the new reality. The Galactic Council had fractured into competing groups. The Xantharian Vorthuns tried to organize a coalition to contain human expansion, but many species refused to join. Some sympathized with humanity. Others feared human retaliation. The old order that had existed for thousands of years was breaking apart. Earth had not been idle during those 3 months. Admiral Karen Hughes oversaw the continued expansion of the human fleet. New warships came out of the secret shipyards every week. Humanity established fortified military stations along every major trade route and border. These stations were equipped with the same devastating weapons that had destroyed the Krell fleet. Any species that approached human territory did so carefully and with respect. President Neil Carter made a bold announcement to the galaxy. He declared the creation of the human sovereign territory. This was a zone of space where human law would be the final authority. The Council had no jurisdiction there. Any species entering the territory would follow human rules or face the consequences. The announcement caused outrage among the major powers, but they did nothing. They understood that challenging humanity now would mean war. Commodore Jake Morrison led patrol groups along the frontier. His mission was to protect human colonies and eliminate threats. His ships hunted down pirate groups and rogue warbands that preyed on weaker species. These operations were brutal and efficient. Morrison's tactics left no survivors among those who attacked innocents. Word spread quickly through the criminal networks. Human-protected space was now the most dangerous place in the galaxy for outlaws. Something unexpected began happening. Younger species started approaching Earth with proposals. They wanted defensive alliances. They wanted protection. The Galactic Council had failed them for generations. Council peacekeepers arrived too late, or not at all. But humanity had proven they would act swiftly and decisively. Human protection was reliable in a way Council protection never had been. Ambassador Patricia Wells received delegations from dozens of species. They came quietly and in secret. They did not want the Council to know they were seeking alternatives. Patricia listened to their stories. Most were similar to humanity's experience. Attacks by stronger species. Pleas for help ignored. Losses that meant nothing to the major powers. She promised to discuss their proposals with Earth's government. The Krell Empire, meanwhile, was tearing itself apart. The destruction of Warlord Thrax's warband had exposed weakness in the central government. Rival factions fought for control. Some Krell leaders demanded revenge against humanity. Others argued that attacking Earth would be suicide. They had studied the Kareth battle recordings. They understood that humanity's weapons were far superior to anything the Krell possessed. The Civil War intensified, and, the once feared, Krell military became fragmented and weak. On Xanthar Prime High Arbiter, Lasara faced mounting pressure. The Xanthari public was disturbed by humanity's rapid rise to power. Military analysts warned that if current trends continued, Earth's fleet would rival the Xanthari Armada within 5 years. Some Xanthari politicians called for immediate action. Others urged caution. Lysara found herself trapped between competing demands. She arranged a secret meeting with Worthen leadership. Counselor Zreth attended, along with his military advisors. They discussed options for dealing with the human threat. A joint military operation was proposed. A massive fleet would jump into human space and destroy Earth's shipyards before they could produce more warships. The attack would be swift and overwhelming. Humanity would be crippled before they could respond. The plan was detailed and carefully considered. Both the Zenthari and Vorthens would commit substantial forces. They would strike simultaneously at multiple targets across human territory. The operation was scheduled to begin within 2 months. Absolute secrecy was maintained. Only the highest levels of government knew about the plan, but humanity had learned to be cautious. Earth's intelligence network had grown significantly since joining the Council. Human operatives worked in neutral systems gathering information. They monitored communications. They cultivated sources among species that resented the major powers. One of those sources learned about the planned attack and passed the information to Earth. Admiral Hughes received the intelligence report and immediately brought it to President Carter. They studied the details of the Zenthari and Vorthen plan. The attack would come in 2 months. It would target multiple locations. If it succeeded, it would devastate Earth's military capability. Karen and Daniel looked at each other and made a decision. Humanity would not wait to be attacked. They would act first. But Earth would not strike with weapons. Not yet. Instead, they would use diplomacy backed by the threat of overwhelming force. It was time to change the galaxy, not through destruction, but through a new kind of alliance. President Carter authorized a bold plan. Earth would call for a galactic summit independent of Council authority. They would invite every species that felt marginalized by the old powers. They would offer an alternative to the Council's failed system. The announcement shocked the galaxy. Earth was not asking for Council permission. They were not operating within the established structure. They were creating something new. The summit would be held on New Harmony, a neutral frontier world. Any species could attend. The agenda was simple. Discuss mutual defense and cooperation outside Council control. Dozens of species accepted the invitation immediately. These were civilizations that had suffered under the Council's indifference for generations. They saw an opportunity for real change. The Zenthari and Vorthens initially refused to attend, but eventually sent representatives. They could not afford to be absent when so many other species were present. The summit began on a warm morning on New Harmony. The meeting hall was filled with delegates from 70 different civilizations. Ambassador Patricia Wells opened the proceedings with a speech that outlined humanity's vision. She spoke about strength through unity. She talked about justice that was swift rather than delayed. She described a galaxy where no species would be left to suffer while bureaucrats debated. She proposed the formation of the Mutual Defense Coalition. This would be an alliance of species committed to protecting each other through military cooperation. Membership would be voluntary. Each species would keep its sovereignty, but members would agree to mutual defense pacts and technology sharing. If one member was attacked, all members would respond. The proposal was direct and clear. Immediate support came from over 30 species. Many were younger civilizations tired of being ignored by the Council. They had watched Earth stand up to the old powers and survive. They wanted that same strength and independence. The room buzzed with excited conversations as delegates discussed the implications. The Zenthari representative Ambassador Kelver tried to discredit the proposal. He stood and gave a long speech about humanity's violent nature. He called humans unpredictable and dangerous. He argued that any coalition led by Earth would destabilize the galaxy. His words fell flat. Many delegates remembered their own experiences with Council indifference. Kelver's speech only reminded them why they were considering alternatives. Commodore Jake Morrison was asked to speak about the Battle of Kareth. He had not wanted to attend the summit, but Admiral Hughes insisted his presence was important. Jake stood before the assembled delegates and spoke quietly. He said humanity had done what every species in the room wished they could do. They had defended their people when no one else would. That was not violence. That was justice. That was survival. He said if standing up to predators made humanity violent, then they would embrace that label. But they would never be victims again. His words resonated through the chamber. The delegates understood. They had all felt helpless at some point. They had all watched their people suffer while the council did nothing. Jake was offering them a chance to never feel that way again. The speech was short, but its impact was profound. The summit continued for 3 days. Debates and negotiations filled every session. Finally, a vote was called. 28 species signed the Mutual Defense Coalition Charter immediately. Another dozen expressed serious interest in joining within the year. The new alliance was real and substantial. The Zinthari and Vorthons realized their plan to attack Earth was no longer viable. A strike against humanity would now mean war with dozens of species. The coalition might be new, but its combined military power was significant. Lasara and Zreth had no choice but to negotiate. A series of tense diplomatic meetings followed. The result was the Treaty of New Harmony. The agreement recognized humanity's right to self-governance and military development. In exchange, Earth agreed to certain limitations on weapon proliferation and territorial expansion. It was not what the old powers wanted, but it was the best outcome they could achieve without risking devastating war. On Earth, celebrations erupted when the treaty was announced. Humanity had achieved something impossible just a year earlier. They had respect. They had security. They had allies. Admiral Hughes was promoted to Grand Admiral of the Coalition. Fleet, President Carter announced. Plans for expanded exploration and colonization. Backed by the strongest military humanity had ever fielded. Commodore Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his new ship. It was named Horizon's Legacy in honor of the fallen. He looked at the stars and thought about his wife and children. The pain of their loss would never completely fade. But that pain had been transformed into something greater. A purpose. A mission. Humanity would never be helpless again. They would never beg for protection again. They had shown the galaxy what humans could become when pushed beyond endurance. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Earth's brutal retaliation had not been savagery. It had been a declaration of independence. The Council, shocked into silence by humanity's display of power, now had to contend with a species that refused to be ignored or victimized. A new order had emerged. At its center stood humanity, forged in grief and tempered by war, ready to defend itself and its allies against any threat the universe could offer. The message echoed across every star system. Humanity had arrived as a true power, and nothing would ever be the same.